Hello, and welcome to the Mother Birth Podcast, where we navigate the terrains of women's health and maternal well-being through the lens of yoga therapy and Ayurveda. I am Leanne Matullo, and I'm a perinatal yoga therapist, a doula, writer, creative entrepreneur, teacher, and mother. I'll be your guide as we excavate the mysteries of conscious conception, pregnancy, birth, postpartum, mothering in all its forms, and matters of the feminine. I'm so glad that you're here. Hello, everyone. Welcome to what I think will be one of the first episodes of the Mother Birth Podcast. I hope to have this podcast, these conversations, clips of them on YouTube, so you can watch them if you want to. And then, of course, I'll have them as audio files only. And where I want to start this series is to share a little bit of my own journey and how I came into this space, came into this work. And so what I really want to talk about today is my fertility journey with maybe both of my children. One story is going to be much longer than the other. And the real purpose of this, to share the fertility story, is to really give you a sense of your own agency when it comes to your health. It's also for those who might be walking a fertility and infertility path and feel like maybe they are not necessarily getting all the supports that they need, or perhaps they might want to take a different approach, or perhaps you're just feeling like really hopeless and you want a different perspective. I hope that this is a balm. I hope that it's helpful. I hope that you can take something from it. And even if you're not on a fertility journey in terms of wanting a baby, perhaps you recognize some patterns that you might have in my story that can actually impede fertility, which is a sign of health, regardless if you want to have a child or not, if you are in the years where you're menstruating. So it is a super hot day. Just to put some context to this, super hot day in Rhode Island. You'll see me if you're watching the video. I'll probably be looking up and out my window at the trees. It helps to not necessarily look at the screen the whole time. And I'm going to be very conscious of time. That way you don't have this huge, expansive, long podcast necessarily, but something that you can really digest. And if you have further questions, you can always let me know. So here goes. Deep breath, right? When I was 26, I think I had just turned 27, but right around the time when I was 26 or 27, I started walking through a struggle with fertility. And just a bit of context, I don't love using the word infertility as a perinatal yoga therapist to using the word infertile. Words really matter, and that's a very negative word, which is a whole problem, because when you are having these issues, where do you go? You go to infertility clinics. So I usually say, you'll hear me say, challenges with fertility or struggles with fertility, but I was there, which is actually quite young when you think about having issues getting pregnant. And my story starts, my partner, my husband, Eugene, and I decided that we wanted to have a baby and we wanted to add to our family. So I also don't say start a family, because I also believe that families come in many shapes and sizes, and that if it is a partner and your dog or your two dogs, which was our case, but that's a family. We wanted to add to our family. And so I had gone to my OBGYN at the time, who I don't see. I don't see any OBGYN anymore, and I can expand upon that in the future if you'd like. And I really liked her. I really trusted her. And I still would like her if we were in the same state. And said, hey, this is what we're thinking. We think we're ready to welcome a child, welcome a baby. How can I best prepare? And so biggest thing was, she said, okay, it's time to, of course, come off of the pill. So I had been on the hormonal birth control pill for 10 years, almost 10 years at that time. So come off of the pill, you're at a healthy weight, you eat healthy, you look healthy, you're fine. Within 3 months, you should have your period, your cycle should start, you should be ovulating, like no problem. Call me if there are any issues. And you know, those moments where like you feel something in your heart, but it's not necessarily logical. And this was one of those moments where I remember thinking like something isn't quite right. Something isn't quite right, but I'll go with it. I'll wait 3 months to call her. And so 1 month went by after going off of the hormonal birth control pill. 2 months went by. 3 months went by, no cycle, no period. And so I called the doctor's office and she said, you know what, keep waiting. It's fine. And not just her, the nurses, other people there. You know, you can just keep waiting. Call me at 6 months. If there's nothing in 6 months, then call me at 6 months. And you probably can guess 4 or 5, 6 months comes and there is still no period. And you cannot get pregnant if you're not ovulating. And I wasn't ovulating, I wasn't having a period. And here's the thing about hormonal birth control, even if you are having a bleed, it's not your period. It's not your period. So what was happening was there's probably an issue when I was on hormonal birth control, and I just didn't necessarily realize it because I thought that my cycle or my period was actually real, that it was induced by something of ovulation. I didn't really care because I didn't want to get pregnant. And so that really wasn't the case. I want to back up a little bit and tell you a little bit about my lifestyle up until this point. Again, as I shared, I was about 26, 27. I had gotten married maybe 4 or 5 months prior to the first meeting with the OBGYN to say that, hey, we're ready to have a baby, or we think we're ready. Are you ever really ready? And I had been diagnosed with celiac, which is an autoimmune disease where you can't eat gluten. I'm not going to go much further into it, but I had that, and that kind of set off some patterns of maybe a bit of disordered eating. Okay. So I became really obsessed with what I was eating after having that diagnosis and not feeling really well. I had lost a bunch of weight. So like 20, 25 pounds wasn't really that big to begin with. So it was a lot. I got a lot of attention for it, for being small, for being really thin. I was also really into running. So super anxious part of my life. I was living in DC for a while, and then I had just moved to Pennsylvania to take a new job, finishing grad school. I coped with all those things by running long distances. Well, long distances for me, so 3 to 5 miles every other day. And not that I had a super stressful job to begin with, but then I changed jobs and that became a very stressful job. I was traveling a lot. So very high intensity lifestyle coupled by very high intensity movement. And I didn't see anything wrong with that. You know, I was really stressed out a lot of the time. My nails were really brittle. My hair was falling out. I didn't really have great digestion. So me now, Leanne now is in perinatal yoga therapy and in Ayurveda would say, oh, actually all of that is a system or those are symptoms of something being really wrong. I just thought, you know, this is what you do when you're in your mid to late 20s. You take the director job, you travel, you exercise, and you maintain a certain image. You become really obsessive with what you eat. And I would say I was what would now be known as orthorexic. That really wasn't super common to be talking about then, but I was what we would call orthorexic, meaning that I was really obsessed with like clean eating and exercising and only intense exercise. Okay. And all of that really affects your cycle because it creates what's called an energy deficit in the system. But none of those things were talked about. On the outside, I looked healthy because I was thin. On the outside, I looked healthy because I ate healthy and I did yoga and I ran, and that's what healthy people do. When on the inside, what was happening was my reproductive system was shutting down because there was too much stress on my body. Okay. So that's the backstory. So after 6 months, I finally went back to my OBGYN, and I had had a slew of side effects coming off of the pill that we don't necessarily need to go into right now, but that weren't really addressed. And I went in to see her, and she said, okay, now that it's been 6 months and your cycle has not returned, I'm going to refer you to a reproductive endocrinologist, which is very common if you're having struggles with fertility. I'm going to refer you to someone at a different hospital and a different clinic, and you can get with them because I remember her saying, I don't want to be the reason between you only being able to have 1 or 2 babies if you wanted to have 5. And I remember thinking, okay, like that was a little unsettling. Okay. And so I scheduled my appointment. I lived in a pretty rural area of central Pennsylvania. So if you are living in central Pennsylvania, you might know and who I am referring to. I will not be referring to any providers by name. So I went to see this reproductive endocrinologist. I can't remember how many months it was in between seeing her and eventually seeing him. But when I say that my body was treated with anything that anything but respect, anything but reverence. I mean it. And at the time, I didn't have the words or the internal authority or the confidence to say, you will not speak to me or my body in that way, because I wasn't speaking to my body kindly either. And so I met with this reproductive endocrinologist and the nursing staff at an infertility clinic, which is a horrible term. And he had run some tests. Again, I don't remember the order of this completely, but had run some tests and looked at hormones. And basically, within the first session, had told me that the reason that I wasn't having a cycle was because my hormones were not at the levels that they should be. I'd also had a scan of my ovary, not of my ovaries, of my uterus, and was told that I had the uterus of a postmenopausal woman at the age of 27 and that I would never conceive naturally. I mean, how would you feel? How would you feel if somebody shared that with you, where you're coming in with hope and you want to have a baby, you're feeling that maybe you don't have these words necessarily or the same words, but that you're feeling that a baby is calling on you to come into the world, but can't, right? And somebody tells you, well, you'll never be able to do this. And so at first, I almost believed him. And so we had subsequent tests and scans and specialists that we saw. And I won't go into the specifics in this podcast episode. I actually am writing a series of essays about obstetrical violence. I have been unpacking, this is years later, and spoiler alert, 2 children later. I've been unpacking what has been obstetrical violence, my experience with obstetrical violence at the hands of doctors and care providers who think that it's okay to treat women in the way that they do. But to not necessarily go into those specifics, I went and I had transvaginal ultrasounds. I went and I had what is called an HSG, where they inject essentially dye into your uterus and it moves up and out through your fallopian tubes to check and see if there are any blockages in the fallopian tubes, any physical or structural issues. My body in both of those instances and in all of the times I met with providers was, again, treated with anything less than respect. Some of the procedures were quite painful to see if I was fertile or if I was having issues. And it was at maybe my, I don't know, 3rd appointment outside of those special visits with this particular endocrinologist, where, again, he said my only option was IUI and then IVF, where he shamed my body again for being into yoga and being a former dancer and being a runner and basically not doing the thing that it's supposed to do, shamed my body, told me again that I would never become pregnant naturally, that I would have to go the advanced reproductive technology route to conceive, that I had this like very strong voice in my head that said, no, like, no, Leanne, he is wrong. It was very strong. Like, I'm sure, again, you've had those moments of, well, logically, like I should be maybe doing XYZ or believing, what this person has to say with all these years of training and study and experience. But my body is very much telling me something different. And in that moment, we went through with kind of a closing meeting of how much IUI, which is intrauterine insemination, and IVF, which is in vitro fertilization, how much both of those things will cost us. Our insurance wasn't necessarily going to cover that. I remember looking at these numbers and just thinking that this was absolutely absurd. Uh, and again, this is also not to shame anyone who has been down those routes, because everybody has their stories and their journeys with having a baby, but that wasn't mine. And it is absurd to think that insurance won't cover something like this, that we might have to pay for it out of pocket. And some of us have more means than others. And again, this is not a shame to anyone or a guilt to anyone, but to me, it wasn't my story. It wasn't my truth. And so I walked out of that clinic and I said, I'm not going back. I'm not going back to him. But I wasn't quite ready to give up on the medical system, the Western allopathic medical system yet. And so I had another referral to see a different OBGYN in a different practice that had helped somebody else that I had met, that I had known, to get pregnant. And at this point, it is maybe a year or so later, a year and a half later, I can't quite remember, but I start seeing him, and I did have a diagnosis. I'm not sure if I had just shared that. I did have a diagnosis of hypothalamic amenorrhea from the reproductive endocrinologist, which is essentially when the reproductive system shuts down. So I referenced that earlier. So it ceases to allow ovulation because the body, he didn't explain it like this, but essentially what that is the body is so stressed out from mental stress, from physical stress, from all of this load that you're putting on it, that it's saying to survive, we don't need reproduction. So we're just going to stop it. And this is something that happens a lot with athletes, with even very young athletes. Their period just stops. It happens in times of stress or when you're traveling a lot, when the body is under an intense stress load. You'll notice that your period might actually come and go, or it becomes less regular, or it just stops altogether. All of that is a signal that there is a very serious deficit in the system, and it's not talked about. It's not talked about in an allopathic medicine perspective. And that's what I really needed to hear from somebody was, you really need support in how you're nourishing yourself. Like, what does that actually look like? Like, you're doing all of the right things externally, all the right exercise and the movement and the eating clean and having, beautiful, fancy, glamorous jobs, whatever that is. But you are actually not well. Like, your inside is really not well. That's what I really needed somebody to say. But that wasn't my story yet. So I had met with not a reproductive endocrinologist, another OBGYN who a lot of people had said they'd seen about their fertility struggles. And again, it was put through tests. Maybe I had something called PCOS. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I had a chromosomal defect. Maybe I didn't. These are really harsh things to hear. I'd also gained back all that weight that I lost from running and doing all these things, which was also uh, a bit of a challenging move because, again, like, society congratulated me for looking really healthy on the outside, but I actually was not healthy on the inside. And he had basically also included shame in the process, which is very common in a fertility journey of, oh, well, I don't get it. First it was you lost so much weight, and so you're not cycling, and that's why, and you'll never get your cycle back, and you'll never conceive naturally. And now it was, oh, well, but you've gained all that weight. So we don't know what's wrong with you. You're an interesting project. And so I think I maybe at that point, hearing those words, had also had that voice kind of snap in my head, enough. It's enough. This is enough for you. And so I left that meeting, appointment, what have you, and came home and called my mom. And my mom said the same thing. I had started a business 6 months prior to this. So I had quit a job, started a business that I loved. I started a yoga studio. And about 6 months into that was also navigating this fertility journey, really wanting to have a baby, but deciding if I can't have that right now, I'm going to create something that I love. And so she said to me, Leanne, live your life, just live your life, let go of this and live your life. And I said, okay. And I did let go. And in that moment, what I committed to was not going on a journey of trying to have a baby, but to try and heal my body. And so what did I do? I focused on the joy of my business and meeting new people in my community and teaching yoga that was slow and really healing and beautiful. And then I started practicing what I now do, and I didn't know it at the time, but what I now know as yoga therapy. And yoga therapy is much more specific than the practice of yoga that we have in the West. It's much more targeted. There's treatment plans for different conditions and different states of disease. But I really started slowing my practice down exponentially. I was really into power yoga and hot yoga. And like I said, I was into running. I stopped running, did a lot of walks, really allowed myself to be in my body rather than constantly running away from it, really examined where my stressors were, my mental load. I really became much more into meditation, longer meditation, much more breath work. And then I had also hired an acupuncturist who is such an integral part of my journey and my story and my learning to connect with energy, life force energy being prana, which in Chinese medicine would be qi. And he really supported me in not the end goal of the baby, which is what allopathic medicine was so focused on, but the end goal being like, let's heal your body. Let's help you get to know your body. Let me support you and your yoga therapy practice and your meditation practice with the work that I do. And a very long story short, within 4 months of working with him, of recommitting to nourishing myself, like I said, eating more, eating all the foods. There are no bad foods. Going for walks, longer meditations, sleeping, doing things that I really love doing, bringing back the joy, what we call ananda in Sanskrit, the bliss, having a slower practice, and then being with this acupuncturist. Within 4 months, I had my cycle return. For more than 2 years at this time, I had amenorrhea. I wasn't cycling at all. And with these supports, and this is really something that in yoga therapy we call the kosha model. So by addressing not just the physical body, but also the energetic health, the mental emotional health, the connection with an intuition and instinct, and then also remembering the joy, which is ananda. With all of those pieces and parts, my system could start to feel like it was safe from the inside out, that I was no longer running away from like a saber-toothed tiger or like a woolly mammoth, that there wasn't a famine out there, that actually it was safe and that I could cycle again. And so I had I had 2 cycles. And again, we weren't trying to necessarily have it. We were not trying, but we weren't trying. It was more about how do I just create more ease and balance in my life. And on what was supposed to be the 3rd cycle, I found out that I was pregnant with our son, who is turning 5 on Friday. I didn't think I was going to get emotional, but I am getting emotional. And I was so surprised and so shocked and so elated because I had been told all of these awful things. My body had endured some awful experiences. My brain and my head and my heart had heard some awful things. And yet here we were pregnant. And it was such a beautiful, just a really beautiful holding of that. My pregnancy was really beautiful. He's really beautiful. I had a very challenging birth, which I'll maybe talk about one day, and a very interesting postpartum with him. But he was really the call. I talk about spirit babies sometimes. He was really the call of, I want to come into this world, which is what I think when we want to have a baby. For a lot of us, it's because a soul wants to come in. He wanted to come in, but he also wanted me to be healthy. And so I constantly think of my son Bodhi as being the catalyst for why I do my work. Because when I did end up being pregnant, I was just in this completely different energetic state and was able to have a really beautiful pregnancy for him. And I think that that's really also really contributed to the beauty of his soul and the way that he is in the world and his spirit. And again, I might be biased because he's my child, but I do really think that when we have what's called conscious conception when we're really allowing ourselves to heal and invite life and receive life rather than demanding it come in, that it creates a much different frequency of an individual, of a soul that's coming in. I really do believe that. And he's one of the reasons why I do this work. So that's his story. So about 2.5 years until I was pregnant. And I hope it's helpful for someone. I hope that any piece of that story is helpful. I would love to touch on other pieces of it, the birth control pill, obstetrical violence, working with yoga therapy from a yoga therapy perspective specifically to heal. But I wanted to give you more backstory on like, how do we actually create safety in our bodies? How do we really create nourishment in our bodies? And are we doing things because they're actually good for us or because society tells us they are? And are we actually healthy, or do we just look healthy from the outside? And are we trying to order up a baby like a pizza, which is not possible? Or are we actually creating space to invite life and to receive life? It's a very different story, right? And so those are some of the questions that I would have for you. Deep breath. With my daughter, who is at the time of this recording 8 months, it was a very different story. I had felt her spirit very, very loudly, I'll say, all around me for a time. And also to preface this, my birth and postpartum were very interesting stories. And so I didn't think I wanted to have any more children until our daughter Uma said that she wanted to come in to the world. And then at some point, I decided to prepare for it. But I had been preparing in between Bodhi's birth and getting pregnant with her the whole time, because I did have a system of understanding when my body was depleted, empty, undernourished, and I could bring myself back into those practices that would really fill me up. I practice something called preconception planning, conscious conception planning, which is something that we do in Ayurveda. I was really aware of my cycle. I knew there wasn't on any sort of birth control in between my son and then getting pregnant with Uma. I knew when I was fertile. I knew when I was ovulating. I could tell all of those different signs. It's something that I work with clients to do. And so when I got pregnant with her, it was very fast. It was very, very fast. Like no time at all. Like basically saying, okay, let's go for it. And then I found out I was pregnant. I knew I was pregnant about 10 days later. And then I took a test, whatever it is, like a couple days after your missed period. And the stories were so different. And that's also something, to think about, is it happened so fast that I was kind of shocked. And it took a while for, my mind to catch up with the reality that, okay, there's another baby coming in. But it also goes to show that when you do these practices, again, something that Ayurveda speaks really specifically to, giving yourself 3 to 6 months to plan for conception, not just saying I want to be pregnant and hoping it happens tomorrow, but to give yourself 3 to 6 months to actually plan for that and to really bring beauty into the body in all of these different ways, through movement, through food, through not moving, through meditation, through bringing the joy, the bliss, the pleasure, and connecting with your intuition, examining your relationships, all of these things. When you're doing all of that, it creates a very different ecosystem, again, to receive life. And so she had a very, very different story. And now she's here. And of course, we are absolutely smitten with her. And the other piece to this is that if you have had a fertility journey, I hope that you realize that lightning doesn't necessarily have to strike twice, that your story can be really different if you're embarking on subsequent pregnancies, your second, your third, your fourth, and so on and so on. So those are my stories. I told you one is much longer than the other, but I hope that it's helpful to someone out there. I hope that it's helpful for you if you are struggling with fertility or infertility, as they say. I hope that if you are planning or thinking about getting pregnant, that you really consider preconception and conscious conception. And I am more than happy to talk to you about that. And as always, thank you for your time and listening to my story. I'm honored that you did. And if you have questions or thoughts, please contact me. We'll include all of the resources in this video and in the show notes themselves. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Jai Ma.